All right, Steve. Here we sit.
Yeah, Michael,
Yeah.
good to be here with you.
Yeah, it is good to be together. We just got done with the global conference, so we're on the heels of that now. That's always it's a relief, but yet I always feel a sense of, I wish there was a little bit more. Like you want to rest, but the adrenaline and the impact, boy, you just wish you could do that every day.
Yeah. You do move at it with a lot of motivation to get back to work.
Yeah.
Take the things you've learned and jump in.
Yeah, with a fire underneath of us.
Yeah.
So, Steve, you've been with us. You've been around. How long have you been practicing and familiar with this paradigm? And tell us briefly about how long it's been. Some of the notable stories along the way. Yeah. Tell us why you're doing this.
Yeah, I say kind of divine connection happened in 1992.
Divine connection in 1992.
1992.
Okay.
I was, to back up to that, growing up as a kid in the Cold War, had an inordinate curiosity about the Eastern Bloc, Iron Curtain, all that stuff. And growing up in a traditional church, the mysterious stories about people smuggling Bibles and what was going on. Nobody knew anything, Sixth grade, I read National Geographic, the first and only article I had ever seen about Albania. The title of it was Albania Alone Against the World. And a reporter had smuggled a small handful of pictures out. I think he said he'd smuggled them out in a trash can or something like that out of Albania. And they got published in National Geographic. And of course, where is this place, Sixth grade, so it kind of gets filed away. My wife and I had met in college. I had finished a 5-year degree in landscape architecture, was looking for my dream job, found it in northern Colorado, Fort Collins, Colorado. I was going to live and die in Colorado, man. Doing my job, fishing on the weekends, mountain biking. I mean, that was it.
You had a plan.
I had a plan, and I was done. I had arrived there. It was just a matter. There were a few bumps in the road. We had I had to work for a year in California and come back, but that was an incredible cross-cultural experience that I didn't know I needed that in an very urban environment. I'd never been in an urban place like that. But anyway, the first part of the story is 1992, Albania had just opened up. A student ministries director from Eastern Europe had come, was supported by our church. He's from Grand Junction, Colorado.
Okay.
Shows pictures, incredible stories. Albania's just opened up. We've been one of the first groups of Americans showing the Jesus film. There's 8,000 people inside the Palace of Culture. There's 15,000 people standing outside just to watch this movie, And it's a Sunday night. And he puts a challenge out. I need you guys to send 10 people to join up with student stint teams this coming summer, and we're going to do evangelism on the beach.
Where are you at this point?
I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado.
You're in Fort Collins, Colorado, seeing this report from this man.
This is the winter of December of 91.
December of 1991.
Yeah. I've just started work, and we just moved to Fort Collins, my wife and I.
Newly married.
A year and a half, September. This is September, we just moved there. December, we'd gotten into a church, gotten involved in a kind of a young couples group. And December, he comes and gives this presentation on a Sunday night. And I remember vividly, my wife and I are on our way home to our apartment. We stop in the grocery store. We're standing in front of the milk aisle. And I turned to her and looked at her. I said, I got to go on that trip. And to paraphrase her or something, she probably says, well, good luck. We just moved here. Nobody knows who we are. We just got here 3 months ago. They're not going to ask you to go on that. So I don't know. I'm just going to sign up for it anyway and see what happens. I'm just really curious. Because during his presentation, that National Geographic article had popped into my mind. My antennas went up.
In your mind, all right.
And I'm like, hey, I know about this place. This is that place that I,
you had connected
with as a kid. And then boom, sixth grade comes again. So long and short of it was, because I had been part of it, that same student ministry in college, I was already trained for what they were going to be doing that summer. So when I applied for it, they didn't know who I was, but they saw the resume and experience, that we'd had in college. And they're like, we just need to get you a passport. That's, you're ready to go. And so I got asked to be on that team of 10. And we went there in 92. Well, the night before we left, Don McCreevy candidated to become the missions and discipleship pastor at that church, coming up from Plano, Texas. And his Acts and Pauline Epistles project were bound together in a plastic binder, and he handed it out to everybody. So this our send-off, it's his candidating meeting, all happened at one time around the evening meal. And I take that thing and I put it in my suitcase. I didn't know what I had in my suitcase, but I threw it in my suitcase. And so for 3 weeks in Albania, I'm reading through this thing and I'm thinking, I'm in the book of Acts right now. There's no churches. There's no believers here. What would Paul do? What would he start teaching them? What would he teach them next? And this is right there, these projects. I'm like, man, I never thought about this way. I never thought about Ephesians this way. I never thought about Acts this way, So it was just the lights were on right there in the midst of that, but enough to just really, really get me thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And coming back on that, Don got hired on and then started teaching courses with the leadership. And then the second tier of leaders that he wanted to bring in was anybody who had anything to do with missions. So I got into that second tier and started plowing through the Acts course, just hating it.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Man. Just tell me the answer.
Oh, yeah.
Why am I doing all? What are we after here? Just tell me the answer. I'm used to getting it, checking it off and moving on to the next thing. What are we doing? In about unit 2, I realized I've never learned how to learn like this. I don't know how to learn like this. I got to stop and refigure this out, reframe the way I'm learning, and I'm finally making that adjustment. It's just boom. It's just like, holy cow, I know what's going on here. And I've never read the Bible this way. And how could I be growing, how could I grow up in a church all these years and not know this and ever see Paul's letters like this way? So it was just and then Albania is, kind of rumbling around the background of the church and there's people there again. But that was enough in 3 years. After about 4 or 5 courses, we're at a crossroads.
Okay.
Now, first thing I knew is I'm not volunteering to go to Albania. That's not what you do. There are no volunteers, missionaries in the New Testament. But the church is recognizing, and I had actually been given some, responsibilities in the church as a result of being involved in this process, leading a small group and leading some Christian ed classes around the Establishing series. That's what we were using was then. First Principles didn't exist. So all that was kind of going on, and the leaders were observing me and saying, hey, we want to send a church planting team to Albania, and we want you and your wife to go. Mm. And
what year was this then?
This is 1994.
It's 94.
Yeah, they have reformed the mission policy around the Acts course and the Pauline Epistles course, and there was a wide, as an evangelical free church, wide open door for Albania. We're going to become a sending agency. We're going to become an Antioch type of church, and we want you guys to be part of that. So we wrestled through that fall, a lot of prayer, a lot of fasting. By 95, I went to my boss at the firm in Fort Collins. I said, this is what we're intended to do.
You're in landscape work.
I'm a landscape architect. I'm a project architect. I'm project associate, or associate in the firm. Making pretty good progress through there. But the whole thing was, it's a 2-year thing. It's not career missions. I'm not moving into career missions. That was the other thing. We were not moving into career missions. You're going to do what Paul did. You went in, you got the work done, you got out, you moved on. So that was kind of the framing of the thing. So, yeah, okay, great. We'll hold your job for 2 years and you come back. Well, 2 years trying to do everything we can. And, we were in the environment. One of the first things was, man, if we want to leave this door open, we got to learn the language. Mm. So that's starting to work against the 2-year plan, and everybody say, no, not just do everything through translators. I just felt really, really strong that there's a longer arc to this. And if we don't learn the language, we shut a door down in the future. And I went back to leaders in our church that sent us and said, would you guys give me permission to spend the next year or start into that process and see how it goes? And they said, yeah, we think that's a good thing to do. That seems reasonable to us. Keep doing the work that you can do along the way. But because we were part of a team, we were joined to a team that was already on the ground working.
Okay.
Great team of about 12, multi-culture, multi-denominational. So we're just kind of added to that team. That's part of the really only significantly intentional church planting team in Albania at the time. They had about almost 12 church plants started out of the founding church, or kind of the base church at the time. So we're joining into that and plugging in where we can. So that gave me the opportunity just to focus on the language for a while, and it came pretty quickly, just because of the environment and for whatever reason, probably divine intervention too.
Well, maybe you were
young. I knew my wife would be learning it. She's very good at language. She knew Spanish already, but I was like, I'd never learned a language, I mean, just some kid from a little sleepy town in Indiana. What do I know,
Yeah.
So
how long did you end up being, because you were pregnant with your son or daughter?
Yeah, our oldest was born. Our oldest was 18 months old when we moved to Albania. So that was part of the other struggle. Was taking a baby to Albania. And my wife had never been to Albania. She'd never set foot on it. First time she saw Albania, she was there to live there for 2 years. But because she had picked up the ideas, from the courses. I mean, she was the one.
The power of paradigms, the power of seeing that you're part of the book of Acts and make that type of life choices.
Yeah. The risk and everything of Albania was secondary to the fact that you know what you're doing, and I trust you, and I trust all these other guys. They're all talking the same language, and there's something bigger here that, let's do that. I'll take that risk. So I greatly admire her for doing that. But I think it was power of the paradigm.
Yeah. So if you fast forward to today, you are working with us in multiple fields. Yeah. Some of which is still Albania, still Kosovo.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the different fields that you're working in.
Yeah.
And in some ways equipping leaders and planting churches that started in the same way that you came up through it.
Yeah. Years ago, Jeff planted this idea in me about a stewardship, a primary stewardship. And I really, really began to think, okay, I think that's what Albania is. I've got a really deep rooting in the language and the culture. This is what my life is to focus on, is this one, getting this paradigm, going in this field and just devoting myself to it. We had moved to New York to start first work among the Albanian diaspora. It just seemed like that's the focus. Little beknownst to me that was actually preparation for a wider, work that began as a result of the relationships formed here, predominantly at the conference, Jean-Claude in France, things were going on in places like Portugal. Early on, there were guys here from Germany and Austria and England from time to time. So there was a wider European. Europe is where I had lived and was kind of have a
Ukrainians
affinity.
Came later.
Ukrainians
Eastern
came.
Europe.
Yeah, that was where it really jumped off, because the Ukrainians came here. Anton and one of his colleagues, and really they found themselves where I had been and my Albanian team had been. And my encouragement to him was just hang out with us, and debrief. Any questions you got, we'll answer them for you. Because they also had the post-communist background that Albania had. So there were so many similarities. The language we spoke together and the experiences and the first generation of Western missions that had come in and established itself a little bit differently, but very similar, just made an affinity right away between the team of Albanian leaders that I had been developing and this new team in Ukraine. It just was immediately a connection.
Yeah, you had been through this process, post-war, post-communism.
Yeah.
And really, that was just a few years before the war started in earnest.
Yeah, 2017, 2018.
Okay.
Yeah, this is when the start of that relationship.
The whole square, the World on Fire square in Kyiv, Ukraine really started 2014.
That's 2014.
But okay, so what you've been saying is parts of different pockets of Europe, there were things burgeoning and bubbling up, and you went in and stirred amongst that in Paris, in Germany, in Albania, and continued to this day in work in Albania, Kosovo. You've stirred in the last, what'd you say, 2017, 18 in Ukraine?
Yeah, Ukraine multiple times, 5 times since the war began, and about 4 or 5 times prior to that. So
yeah, and I went with
that's
you.
been a key one.
What was that?
Last summer.
That was last summer, so 6-7 months ago. And in fact, I think on the way there, we stopped at a greenhouse place, and you were all you were all excited about all the different species.
I was watching other landscape
and plants.
Yeah, that was fun.
I remember I had to Anton and I had to pull you away from that because you're.
It's like, oh, this is my world, man.
Yeah.
I know this place. Yeah.
So we've traveled together and equipped lots of leaders. So man, we could say so much about those different fields, but maybe just end this part with we've been having celebrations currently. Our strategy is to have celebrations in different places to really get some traction, to celebrate what's been going on, to give encouragement to existing leaders. So talk briefly about going to hold a celebration in Spain this year, very first one in Spain. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I just came back from a trip that, interestingly enough, started in Ukraine and then crossed the continent, ended in Spain, with a couple of stops along the way to introduce the paradigm into some new networks. So really to kind of run the gamut across Europe of what's going on related to new work, existing work, old paradigm, developing new paradigm, the whole continuum.
You were in Poland for a while.
Yeah.
Ukraine. Global Pentecostals. You were with Baptists, big Baptist denomination.
Yeah, so kind of old. I mean, that's just the nature of Europe. It's all mosaic of all sorts of things, both from Europe and continuing to be influenced by North America and the wide diversity across there. But getting then to Spain, and here in this little corner of Spain, and you can't also miss the fact that you're on the edge of the world as far as Paul's time was concerned. In Cadiz, Spain, around this area. This is where the conquistadors set out. Mario and I went in a chapel where, guys like Cortez or whatever got their last blessings from the priest, and then they head off on Spanish galleons for the New World. You're in that port, and it's not missed to say this is where Paul was going, and to get there and to also realize that there's a burgeoning work there of a cluster of house churches that looks. If I could imagine anything just from my limited exposure there about what we've been talking about in the paradigm in terms of well-trained leaders, established believers, gathering as families, that I was in the midst of it, and the little cluster of churches there that is carrying a really, really powerful stewardship and has a vision for a vision to be part of what God's doing in Europe. It's a vision that's far bigger than what they are, and they want to connect with that. And that was part of my task was to connect them with what was going on in the other places. For the first time, for them to really see the bigger picture in Europe, but to say we're as much a part of that as anybody is, even though we're, and I would say especially because we're 3 charismatic communities clustered together that have a vision for our territory here in Spain. So, and there's leaders in other cities that we connected online with. Mario was online with one of the guys in the Dominican Republic was on with us at that time.
Yeah, that's the
Arturo.
Yeah, okay.
And as well as a guy in Madrid who's really exploring this and talking, looking to begin a network of house churches. They don't really have an urban, they're trying to crack the nut in an urban situation. Where they are in Western Spain it's kind of a seasonal tourist area, but the people there are just, it's just the root it's just rooted right into their daily lives. They're not doing anything out of the ordinary except kind of bringing the gospel into their ordinary lives and reforming their relationships around it and drawing other people into it. There's so many stories that I heard in those 4 days about how people got into those churches. I'm just like, that's exactly the way it's supposed to happen. It's really cool.
Through a way of life.
Yeah.
It's a way.
Yeah,
It's a set of patterns in which we live our life. It's not a gospel track. It's not just a saying.
Yeah.
It's not just a baptism. It's a way of living that Christ expects out of us. And he gives us that framework again in the book of Acts, all the way back to how you started us.
Yeah.
And that's what's so exciting about that situation is the purity around Acts and the purity around what they're doing, while simultaneously being connected not only in Europe now, as you're helping them be connected to, but they're connected to 13, 14 other Latin countries in Latin America that he's helping steward, back to the word you used earlier. And he feels part of his primary stewardship is to not only have a local aspect and a Europe and the Spanish culture there, but a Latino culture from the Latin countries as well. And God's given him a real opportunity in fields over there with many of those leaders too. Yeah.
And I really I resonate with that because the stewardship where I began in Albania is where three civilizations come together. Islamic, Orthodox, and Western all come together. It's a corner where three of them meet. And those guys have a similar thing with colonial, Latin America, but European culture, and to some degree a little bit of Islamic culture in North Africa, which spans the southern part of the Mediterranean and Europe too. So it's a interesting coming together, of a lot of things at one time, that if this complex network stuff does what we believe it will do, and Paul did it, the diversity of those cultures, we can have one expanding network that is rooted in all those cultures, but actually can work together in unique ways, especially in the diaspora situations.
Yeah, that's the wisdom of the plan, the wisdom of the framework that we've been left in the New Testament. It does work in every culture across all time. We can tap into that wisdom, but we have to pick up from a hermeneutical standpoint. We've got to get back to those traditioning processes that are left in the New Testament and stop reading it as a theological textbook and a systematic theology teaching. And instead, we got to get back to the way and the hermeneutic behind that way.
And we spent 22 years in New York area, tried to establish this and root that there, which is where you have the benefit of, it's very Western culture. I mean, it's epicenter of our cultural, here in
New York City.
But you have the diversity of the diaspora connections that are in there too. So, working there and continuing to work with that team where Matt and Scott are, and the network of churches that both Bill and I were a part of for a number of years, and to see that transition. We've had the long span Western experience that's really, really helps now, especially with our system filled out the way that it is in terms of the training system and the processes and strategies that we have together to accelerate that back into Europe and other places, because we've done the Western thing and we know where all the problems are and how hard it is.
Yeah.
But now with the tools and the global network and the direction things are going, can take that learning experience and accelerate in other places as well.
All right. We really only have about a minute left.
Got it. All right.
So very quickly, all this is not without you doing something in your local setting now. You moved from New Jersey, and now you're, for different strategic reasons and family reasons, you're in Indiana, back in Indiana, and you're starting a fresh work there. You're not just talking about these things. You're and visiting and stewarding in those places, but you're actually doing it locally. So give us the fresh work that you're doing locally.
Yeah. Well, we, family reasons and all sorts of other, as you said, pointed us back to that as somehow, some way, it being strategic to move back to Crawfordsville, Indiana, where we live, and to be connected. One of the things that excited me was the fact that there's about 5 Albanian families in their area. So, even there in my wife's hometown, we can, engage in cultural connections we have. But I cannot be out there on the far reaches of places in other networks talking about something I am not prepared to or working hard at in my own. And I've told leaders for years, you've got to get rooted in your local church.
To have a base.
You cannot be a free electron moving around, doing tradition or looking like a traditional parachurch. You got to be rooted somewhere. You got to have local elders that you're team with at sodality, modality, balance, and churches that you yourself are dealing with people's lives on the ground, and you're engrafted with that because that's what you want to see happen in the rest of the world. They're all like things, So I would be at a disadvantage in my work overseas if I were not doing that at home and could speak to that, and say, yes, I am doing that there, and here's what it looks like, and here's what I'm struggling with it. Yeah, I've had that problem too, and here's how I'm trying to address it. So, yeah, we went to the Midwest. We bought a house simply because of a large room. We didn't see it. We just told my sister-in-law, put a bid on that because we have a gathering space there. We hope that will be a laboratory for other leaders to come and to replicate those gatherings in their home, and with a strategy. The strategy that I'm helping the guys in Ukraine is a small model of it for Montgomery County, Indiana. I believe it can be done.
Building a family locally in your own setting and being faithful to the way the book of Acts frames it in, and the New Testament, all the apostles' letters.
Yeah.
And then all the different fields that you're working and stewarding and stirring amongst, equipping. So
yeah, because the paradigm, it all fits together. It's just all one thing, that you just move around in. I don't see them as, they're not separate things. You're not making any shifts. You're just moving around in the same Aspen Grove, the symbolic thing we've been talking about.
We just got done with we've got to tell people the Aspen Grove, one of the largest, or I think the largest living organism in the world is an aspen grove. One of them out in Utah or Colorado somewhere.
Yeah, it's a great metaphor. It's great.
Yeah, and its root system is, one of them has the same DNA across the whole, started from a single DNA, and now it's has all the same root structures, and the roots communicate with one another. One bit gets hurt, send resources. So in many ways, we can have thousands and thousands upon hundreds of thousands above ground, but our roots in the paradigm of the way of Christ and his apostles, the book of Acts, is the same root structure across. Yeah. So good to talk to you.
Likewise, great to be here.
Yeah, and I look
great to be working together on it. Yeah.
All the work ahead of us.